Hi everybody, this is Mr. Magic here, and today I wanted to talk to you about, this is my first deck tech. I wanted to cover a commander that I have mixed feelings about, and that's BRAGO King Eternal. So my BRAGO deck is built as BRAGO stax, or control, and so when you're building a deck, I know it sounds obvious, but the first thing you want to do is ask, well, what is the goal of the deck? What is the deck designed to do? And then every card in the deck needs to contribute to that goal in some way. And as a deck builder, and I know as a person who watches other people play, I feel like probably a lot of people don't actually ask that question about each card. So with my BRAGO deck, the goal of this BRAGO deck is to control the game, just to lock the game as hard as possible and as fast as possible until I can take infinite turns. And we'll talk about how I manage each of those things, and then we'll talk about some other ways that you can play BRAGO. So we will now. So why do I have mixed feelings about BRAGO? And I guess I would say that I have mixed feelings about BRAGO because he's very, very powerful, and the competitive part of me likes to win, and it is easy to win a game of Magic piloting BRAGO, especially the way I have built this BRAGO deck. However, I end up usually feeling bad about the way that I lock my opponent out of the game. I end up playing a game of solitaire, and so there's a sense of embarrassment, at least for me, about that. And I need to know beforehand that this needs to be part of the Rule Zero conversation. Your opponent needs to be okay playing against stax if you're going to play BRAGO like this. So let's talk about some of the control components. I have Sludge Monster out of Midnight Hunt, and then I've got, and so for those of you that don't know, Sludge Monster enters the battlefield or attacks, put a slime counter on up to one other target creature. Non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 2/2. So this is a fast way to turn all of your opponent's stuff into just vanilla 2/2 creatures. So here's another Rishadan Brigand. Enters the battlefield. Each opponent sacrifices a permanent unless he or she pays 3. And so BRAGO, of course, is going to be flickering these creatures. We're going to be getting multiple of these sludge counters off of Sludge Monster, or slime counters off of Sludge Monster, and we're going to be getting multiple triggers off of Rishadan Brigand. So that's those. I think when especially when Rishadan Brigand was printed back in Mercadian Masks, the idea was that you would probably only get one. You probably only get one use out of that, but now we get a lot of uses out of that because there are so many ways to manipulate that. So many ways to get extra value out of those triggers. Now, together with that, I have the Rishadan Cut Purse, and I have the other Rishadan that goes with that. So and those are all the same thing. It's just the condition is pay 1, pay 2, pay 3. And so you're either breaking your opponent's, you're breaking down their board state, chipping it away one piece at a time, or you are, or you're taxing them. And eventually they get to the point where they just can't pay. They just can't pay for these things. So then for more, let's look at some of these other control components. We've got Lawmage's Binding. The enchanted creature has flash, which is great, and the enchanted creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. So, let's say you're running up against a Krenko Mob Boss deck, and you're concerned that your opponent is going to make a bunch of goblins. Well, Lawmage is Binding. Now his activated abilities can't be activated. Or let's say you're playing against Lateral Blade of the Elves. Well, Lawmage is Binding in a way is even better than killing that thing, because now your opponent has to worry about destroying their own creature, which a lot of decks aren't equipped to do. It's sort of counterintuitive, and a lot of players don't even think about killing their own creatures. And and so now you have handcuffs on whatever creature that is, and you just really don't have to worry about it for a few minutes. So then I have Hyodai, Soul of Kamigawa, in there to give indestructible. That's to protect my stuff. Another control component, Cage of Hands. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. So if you Cage of Hands on Lateral, then she never gets to attack. She never connects. She never makes elves. She never taps those elves to deal damage to you and to gain life. So that's that'll shut down a Lateral deck or any attack-based deck real fast. Somebody drops a Blightsteel Colossus on you, and you Cage of Hands, and you're good. So we have a card like Propaganda. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. So, you want some breathing space to go ahead and solidify your lock on the game. Propaganda is a great early play to help you with that. Then let's see. Just running through and kind of sorting these things as we go. Demotion. Enchanted creature can't block, and activated abilities can't be activated. So it leaves the attack option open. But say if you're playing against, Krenko is a creature that I never attack with. I'm always activating his abilities, and so even if you were playing against another Brago deck, to demote that Brago puts it in a situation where that's you're where it's an attack trigger, and so it's not going to activate. I've got Glowing Anemone here out of Mercadian Masks. When Glowing Anemone comes into play, you may return target land to its owner's hand. So now you're messing with your opponent's mana base, and that can make you some enemies really, really quickly. People do not like when you do that. Treachery. Treachery is a fantastic card. Very, very powerful. It is functionally free. You pay 5 into it, and you get 5 back. Well, so not only do you get to steal your opponent. Let's say we get a few turns into the game, and I play a Treachery and I steal say my opponent's commander. Well, then I attack with Brago and I flicker my Treachery and steal and target another of their creatures, stealing a second creature. But I tapped 5 lands and then untapped those lands. Well, I floated 5 mana. And now I have functionally, so I stole a creature and I have 5 floating mana that I can spend. That's very, very powerful. Let's see, that's more of a win con. So here's the Rishadan footpad. Talked about the fact that I had one of those. Another component here, Reality Acid. Reality Acid is just very, very versatile. It's enchant permanent. I can put Reality Acid on someone's lands. Again, like I said, if you start touching people's lands, you make enemies really fast. That is a salty thing to do. If you want to see a table blow up in your face, touch somebody's lands. But when Reality Acid leaves play, so it has Vanishing 3, and normally it's designed, the design of the card was you're going to play this, you're going to wait 3 turns, and then this thing that you enchanted is going to die. Well, Brago abuses that because we're going to Reality Acid somebody's lands. We Reality Acid their mountain. And then Brago's going to attack and flicker Reality Acid. Well, that mountain just died, and when it re-enters, I can put it on another mountain or on a creature or on any permanent that I want. Let's see. Oromancer is in here predominantly to just in case somebody destroys one of my enchantments, because this is a white-blue deck. It's very enchantment heavy. Runs a lot of enchantments, and that's fine. It's just we need to make sure that we're ready to go and fetch those enchantments. So if I'm playing against mill and somebody mills some of my critical enchantments, well, I want to go get them. Then let's see a little bit more. There's Azorius Justicare. Enters the battlefield, detain up to 2 creatures your opponents don't control. So that the effect of that is it's a Lawmage's binding, but for 1 turn. But if you're flickering Azorius Justicare every turn, then you can detain 2 creatures, and you can hold up the board state. You can effectively detain 4 creatures, soft lock 4 creatures with Azorius Justicare, and that's without any shenanigans like Brago's got double strike, or you get to the point where you can infinitely flicker Brago. Salty card right there. Frozen Ether. Artifacts, creatures, and lands your opponents control enter tapped. Everything your opponents do slows down by 1 turn. And if you want to frustrate your opponent, that's a way to do it. Reflector Mage. Bounces, enters the battlefield, bounces a creature your opponent controls, and then they can't play a creature with that name the next turn. So, Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield. If it was kicked, gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost equal to the kicker cost, equal to or less than the kicker cost. And if it's an equipment, you have to attach that equipment to Thieving Skydiver. But the real issue here is just you can take your opponent's stuff, and that is, again, you're going to get some salt for that. One of the saltiest cards in the game, right there. You can't get more frustrating than good old Counterspell. So Ghostly Prison, very, very similar to our Propaganda. Creature, it's just white instead of blue. Can't attack unless the controller pays 2 for for each creature that's attacking you. So we've got Propaganda, Ghostly Prison. Just, you know, those are just some stay off my back kind of cards. Monk Realist, your opponent's playing enchantments that are bothering you. Well, he ETBs and destroys target enchantment. You have to be careful not to flicker him after you've cleared out all the other enchantments on the board, because you don't want to be forced to target your own enchantments. We've got Active Authority. Enters the battlefield and exile target artifact or enchantment. And the second clause says at the beginning of your upkeep you may exile target artifact or enchantment. If you do, its controller gains control of Active Authority. Well, you want to... Well, you're only working, in BRAGO, you're only working off of the ETB clause. So you're never relinquishing control of Active Authority, and you're just ringing it for extra value. So, those are the staxy sorts, or the staxy components of my BRAGO build. This is how you're going to hold the, just hold the game down. And let's see, there is actually one other component that I meant to, or a couple of other components, excuse me. There's Contagion Engine. Enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. And then, of course, 4 and tap it to proliferate twice. You proliferate twice off of that. So it enters the battlefield. I put a +1 counter on each creature. And then BRAGO attacks, and I flicker it. It enters the battlefield again. So I put more -1 counters. And then if you've got the 8 mana, you can main phase 1, pay 4 and tap it to proliferate twice. Then BRAGO can flicker it. You get another -1 counter off of the ETB. You get another -1 counter off of the ETB. Then you can pay 4 and tap it again to proliferate again. So you squeezed 6. If you had the mana for it, you can squeeze 6 -1/-1 counters out of that Contagion Engine the first turn you drop it. Icefall Regent. Tap target creature and opponent's controls, and then it just doesn't untap as long as you control Icefall. So if you can protect Icefall Regent, then you can slowly soft lock all of your opponent's creatures. Besides that, he's got Ward 2, very powerful card. This is a banned card, Ireo Sorotami. He's blue 1, and then on the 4th spell of any given turn, you flip Ireo Sorotami, and he becomes Ireo's Essence, which says counter the first spell played by each opponent each turn. And if you want to soft lock everybody else out of the game, then you play that with Rule of Law. And Rule of Law says each player can only play 1 spell per turn. So that means nobody else plays any spells, and you play 1 spell per turn. Now you grind that, you will slow that game down to a halt, but you'll be the only one doing anything. And that is, most people will rage quit on that. Agent of Treachery, very salty card. If you should get 2 ETB triggers out of him the first turn you play him. He's going to enter the battlefield normally, and then BRAGO's going to flicker him once. And you gain control of target permanents. So, like I said, you want to be super salty. You steal somebody's lands. That gives you more mana, gives them less mana. Every land you steal is an advantage of 2. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you control 3 or more permanents you don't own, you draw 3 cards. So Agent of Treachery, besides being stacks, he's huge card draw in your favor. Then we've got Peregrine Drake. Peregrine Drake's more mana base, so we'll cover that in just We'll cover some mana acceleration. Peregrine Drake, he enters and untaps up to 5 lands. So you can flicker that Peregrine Drake, and you can store up a lot of floating mana really, really quickly. Burdened Aerialist enters the battlefield, creates a treasure token. Thrawn Dynamo, you can float 3, and Brago flickers non-land permanents, so it re-enters untapped, and you can float another 3. Felwar Stone, of course, to make you some colored mana. Lots of options there. So then we'd get into, let's see, these guys are all card draw. Cloud Blazer, ETB, gain 2 life, draw 2 cards. Pondering Mage, look at the top 3, put them back in any order, draw 1. Merchant of Secrets, ETB, draw a card. So all card draw. Agent of Treachery is also card draw, but we talked about him already. When we talk about mana, there's Core Cartographer, there's Solemn Simulacrum. Enter the battlefield, search your library. With Core Cartographer, it's a Plains card. With Solemn Simulacrum, it's a basic land card. So with that, we would move into, so a lot of that is control. How does the control components of this deck work? And so then, that's how I'm going to soft lock the game. Well, now I've soft locked the game. Well, how do I win the game? It doesn't do any good to lock everybody else out of the game if I don't win. And so for that, we have a number of parts. The primary win condition of this game, or of this deck, is to take infinite turns. And we do that with any of these cards. Time Warp, target player takes an extra turn. Walk the Eons, target player takes an extra turn. Temporal Manipulation, target player takes an extra turn. Arcane Savant says that at the beginning you reveal him, and you tie a card to him. And then whenever he enters the battlefield, you play that card. So I've got Alrund's Epiphany. Any extra turn card is perfectly adequate to ETB Arcane Savant. Well, so Arcane Savant, that can go infinite with Brago all by itself. The other 3 need a little help, and for those we grab Mnemonic Wall and Archomancer, and the Mirari Conjecture is there we go. There's also a card for 7 called Scholar of the Ages, which allows you to fetch 2 instants or sorceries. But so the gimmick here is Archomancer enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. So I play my Temporal Manipulation, it resolves and goes to the graveyard. Or it gets countered and goes to the graveyard. I don't even really care. Somebody has to exile it before I've got a problem. Well then, Brago attacks and I flicker Archomancer. He enters the battlefield and I go fetch my Temporal Manipulation. And play it again on my extra turn. Well, so how does this work with Mirari Conjecture? And for that, let's grab a couple of counters and talk about how sagas work. Let's say I played my Mirari Conjecture, and as soon as I play it, it gets a counter. Well, then I play during let's say main phase 1, I play my Temporal Manipulation, and it resolves and goes to the graveyard, and I have an extra turn waiting. There's Brago, he attacked. Well, then I flicker my Mirari Conjecture, and as soon as it comes back in, it gets 1 counter. And it says I return target instant from my graveyard. Well, Temporal Manipulation is not an instant. So then I start my extra turn and I draw a card. Well, immediately after my draw step, Mirari Conjecture gets a 2nd counter. And I would go get my temporal manipulation because the second mode is return target sorcery card from your graveyard. So now I'm holding temporal manipulation. We go to combat. Brago attacks and flickers Mirari Conjecture, which re-enters and gets 1 counter as soon as it enters the battlefield. I play temporal manipulation. It goes to the graveyard, and then during the draw step, or after the draw step of the extra turn, Mirari Conjecture gets a 2nd counter, and I go fetch temporal manipulation. So there's the infinite loop, and that's how that works off Mirari Conjecture. And that is the, so to speak, the win con of the deck. It's death by 1,000 cuts with tiny little Brago as a 2/2, or as a 2/4, excuse me. And to go with that, there's Azor's Elocutors. That just speeds things up a little bit. You manage this in 5 turns instead of, in the 10 or so that it would take to just whittle somebody down with Brago. But usually by the time you present an infinite loop like that, the rest of the board is willing to drop out. Leyline of Anticipation and Shimmermere are in what I call the enabler category. They let me play things at instant speed, and that's pretty critical. Shimmermere is restricted to artifacts, but when we start talking about things like Rings of Brighthearth and Lithoform and Panharmonicon, and using those in conjunction with, say, a Soul Ring or a Thran Dynamo in order to, there's a way to construct this loop. Let's say I've got my Thran Dynamo and my Rings of Brighthearth. Brago attacks, and I've activated an ability, so I'll tap my Thran Dynamo to pay 2 into the Rings of Brighthearth and to trigger to duplicate Brago's ability. Well, Brago will flicker himself and the Thran Dynamo, and now I have mana available to activate Rings of Brighthearth again, and Brago will flicker the Thran Dynamo, and I'll tap it to activate Rings of Brighthearth and duplicate his ability and ad infinitum. And so anything that can produce 2 mana, like I said, Thran Dynamo, Soul Ring, a couple of other options, then you can infinitely flicker, or you can stack infinite flicker triggers off Brago. So then we have some other things, just combat interaction or combat modifiers for Brago. We have Duelist's Heritage and Fire Shrieker to give Brago double strike. If we haven't drawn into Rings of Brighthearth or Lithoform or Panharmonicon to get infinite flickers, we can at least get double flickers out of those. Whisper Silk Cloak gives Brago unblockable, as well as Protective Bubble, and then Trailblazer's Boots gives Brago non-basic land walk. Very, very dense. There's very, very few games of Commander nowadays where you don't end up with your opponent has a non-basic land on the field. Traveler's Cloak. I get to pick land walk of some type. And all these just ensure that Brago connects and we actually do get the trigger. Then protecting Brago. We've got Diplomatic Immunity, which gives Brago Shroud, and it gives itself Shroud. Robe of Mirrors gives Brago Shroud. Nurok's Stealth Suit gives Brago Shroud. So lots of stuff there to give Brago, Shroud, and to give him plenty of cover. Then Jace's Mindseeker is in here, just in the event. So Jace's Mindseeker is going to enter the battlefield, and your opponent mills 5 cards, and then you can cast an instant or sorcery from from among those 5 without paying its mana cost. So, you know, you have the sort of nuisance of dumping 5 cards, but there's the added injury of, well, I'm going to use one of them against you. I run Urza, the Lord-High Artificer, in here because you can create an infinite number. If you're infinitely flickering Brago, then you can create an infinite number of robots off of Urza. You also have the power to, so Urza ETBs, and he creates a 0/0 colorless artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Well, so there's a number of critical artifacts that you're going to be playing in this deck. I mean, these are here, and then there are others, of course, besides. But then, so Urza, besides that, is going to be making his own artifacts. And, you're going to drop him, and then you're going to flicker him the first turn. And then, so you've already got 2 ETB triggers, 2 robots off of him. Well, then besides that, Urza can turn all of your artifacts into boxes. And so if you've got say a Panharmonicon to double ETB triggers, Urza makes 2 robots every time he enters. Well, that's just enough to pay off Rings of Brighthearth. So Rings of Brighthearth, Panharmonicon, Urza, and Brago, that's infinite right there. Because Urza can tap these robots the turn they come out. He is tapping them. You are not. And so the summon sickness rule is not, doesn't affect that particular component, because he doesn't give the creature the text tap, add blue to your mana pool. He taps the artifact to add blue. And so there is a ruling distinction there. Then let's talk about a couple of things that I don't do and that you certainly could. One is that you can add some faster mana to this deck. Any of your cheap moxes, your budget moxes, Opal, Amber, and Chrome. All of those are mana positive the turn you play them, and Brago can flicker every artifact. So, you can stack mana off of those artifacts if they're in your deck. And my copies of those cards are in my Joy Storm deck, so I could proxy them into this, but Brago's a nuisance enough as he is. Well, I don't really need to make him faster. Jeweled Lotus. Jeweled Lotus will make Brago faster. And again, like I said, he's nuisance enough as he is. So, looking at a couple of staxy pieces that aren't in here, I've got Pariah and Stuffy Doll. This is a pretty famous combo. You play Stuffy Doll, he's indestructible, enters the battlefield, choose a player, and Stuffy Doll deals damage. Whenever Stuffy Doll is dealt damage, he reflects that damage to that player. Well, then you, of course, enchant Stuffy Doll with Pariah, and all damage that would be dealt to me is instead dealt to Stuffy Doll, and Stuffy Doll reflects, the indestructible Stuffy Doll reflects that to target opponent. And then once you've reflected enough damage into that other opponent, you just flicker Stuffy Doll and target a new opponent. That would be a way to do that. Then let's talk about some big beat sticks. Who doesn't love to just whack an opponent? These are things, like I said, that I own, but that aren't really in my Brago deck. So, for your beat sticks, these are some good, just punch them in the face kinds of cards. that function well in the BRAGO deck. Starting off with Yoshimaru out of the Kamigawa set. Whenever another legendary permanent ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on Yoshimaru. So you're flickering BRAGO, and every time you flicker him, you're stacking counters on Yoshimaru, and he gets big fast. Soul Herder, same thing. Plus, he gives you the ability to flicker a permanent during your end step. So he's not limited to legendaries. Any flicker puts a +1 counter on him, and he can give himself 1 counter every turn. Kiora Best's the Sea God. You play it, it's 7, it's expensive, but you're going to play it, and mode 1 is create an 8/8 blue Kraken with hexproof. So you've got a huge Kraken, and it's hard to target. It's got hexproof. Well, then BRAGO attacks, and you flicker it, and you make another Kraken. And the next turn, BRAGO attacks, and you flicker this, and you make another Kraken. And it's very, very quickly, you can establish a very large army of big, fat, hexproof Krakens. Finally, the Hero of Retrograde. Hero of Retrograde gives himself a +1 counter every time cards get exiled from the battlefield. So any BRAGO flicker triggers give him a +1 counter. Once he gets 5 or more counters, he has flying and becomes an angel. And once he gets 10 or more counters, he becomes indestructible and has the God card type. So Hero of Retrograde, blows himself up and becomes just a big beat stick. Then let's see. Just going to grab a couple of other noteworthy items. To talk about with BRAGO. Again, these aren't in my deck, not the way that I've got it running, but I'll show you quickly the Scholar of the Ages that I was talking about before. Scholar of the Ages costs 7 for 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, return up to 2 target instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. So if you had Scholar of the Ages going, you could recur not only your Temporal Manipulation, but some other critical combo card or critical sorcery card that you wanted. But let's talk about these other noteworthy items. Azor the Lawbringer. Costs 6. That's the biggest reason he's not in this deck. But when he ETBs, each opponent can't cast instant or sorcery spells during that player's next turn. So you don't want your opponent, playing their own instants and sorceries. That shuts them down. But he also has, for blue, blue, white, and X, whenever he attacks, you pay this amount, and if you do, you gain X life and draw X cards. So Azor can become kind of a late game card draw. If you've got Azor on the field and you've got some extra mana and you haven't drawn your combo pieces, Azor can hold your opponent out of modifying their own board state while you draw cards. So very powerful. Decree of Silence is a banned card, so talk with your play group about things like that. But it is very staxy, very control-y. Opponent plays a spell, counter that spell, and put a depletion counter on Decree of Silence. And if there are 3 or more depletion counters on Decree of Silence, sacrifice it. Well, especially in a 1v1 game, this can be really, really powerful because your opponent is going to play a spell, and Decree of Silence is going to counter it. And they're going to play, if they play another spell, Decree of Silence counters that. And they know that the first 3 spells they play are going to get countered. They have to play 3 spells, whatever they are, just to get rid of Decree of Silence. But if they only play 2 in a turn, well, you can flicker Decree of Silence the next turn and it comes back in with no counters on it. and now they have to try to build up to 3 spells in a turn. And unless a deck is engineered to do that, that can be difficult. Runed Halo enters the battlefield and you choose a card name. You have protection from the chosen card name. Well, let's say that, let's say you name your opponent's commander. Let's say that you've got the flash leyline of anticipation on the field, and somebody targets you with a great big fireball, and you flash in a Runed Halo naming fireball. Well, that just deflated them. Timely Ward can give BRAGO indestructible. Archmage Ascension is a fascinating card, especially in a deck that's paced like this. So at the beginning of your end step, if you drew 2 or more cards this turn, you would put a quest counter on Archmage Ascension. And as long as Archmage Ascension has 6 or more quest counters on it, if you would draw a card, you may instead search your library for a card and put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So Archmage Ascension, it's slow to get going, unless, say, you could manipulate it with Contagion Engine and proliferate a lot of extra counters onto it. But once it's there, it's a repeat tutor. Every time you draw a card, you can go get exactly what you need. So if you can put down Archmage Ascension, protect it, and get it up to 6 counters, that's a win con, because it's going to just enable you to go get all of the pieces that you need. Then finally, Light Pause. Whenever an aura enters the battlefield under your control, if you cast it, you may search your library for an aura card with a mana value less than or equal to that aura with a different name. So the different name clause is meaningless in Commander. You're never going to have 2 of the same name in a deck. And it doesn't help us to say if we've got Light Pause and we start flickering our auras, well, we didn't cast those. We flickered them. But we do at least get a free tutor out of every one of those auras, and there are a lot of auras in this deck. So those I felt were all noteworthy. They are, one of my binders I have dedicated to commanders and to ideas that I would like to, ideas and cards that are connected to a particular commander, and that maybe they didn't make it into the deck, or maybe they just came out of the deck, and I'm not sure that I really want them gone, and I want to know where it is. And so in this binder here, I have a full page sleeve protector with BRAGO right there, and then the next the next pages, the immediate pages after that are full of cards that I'm thinking about. Do they belong in the BRAGO deck or not? And that way they're not back in the rest of my collection. And I'm like, well, where did I put that, or etc. My other, before I came up with this idea, I'd have my boulder full of the deck, and then I was constantly just stuffing extra things in the back. And I'm like, oh, well, that might go great in here, that might go great in here, that might go great in here. And instead, this gets all those extra cards that aren't actually in the deck. Well, it gets them somewhere else, so that the boulder is not stuffed with stuff. So anyways, that's my BRAGO deck tech. That's how I play BRAGO. And if you guys have any recommendations about, what else can you do with BRAGO, I would love to hear that. I think BRAGO is a very fascinating, he's a very fascinating commander. He's very, very powerful. He meets all of your qualifications for a CEDH commander. You talk about when you talk about CEDH commanders, and for those of you who aren't subscribed to CEDH TV, you should go over there. You should check out his channel, and you should definitely watch some of his videos. But he talks about this. He says, you know, how do you know if a commander is CEDH viable? And, you know, and there's a difference between commanders that are fun, commanders that you think are interesting to play, and commanders that you think are CEDH viable. And so BRAGO is cheap. That's one component. He costs 4. So you can get him into play early, especially with some fast mana like your Budget Moxes, your Jeweled Lotus, your Soul Ring, etc. You know, you can get BRAGO into play on turn 2 using some of those shenanigans. And then, or turn 1 maybe even. But then, what are the other characteristics? You know, one of your questions is, does your commander, does he become a guaranteed combo piece? Well, BRAGO definitely does. We just abuse Enter the Battlefield triggers with BRAGO. So he guarantees that we're able to combo. As long as he's in play and we can protect him, we can combo. Then, you know, one of your next questions is, does the commander desire bad cards? And you know, or does the commander tend to combo with bad cards? It's not enough to be a combo piece. You need to combo with good cards. And well, BRAGO definitely, I mean, you can pick bad cards if you want to, but that's your own fault. BRAGO definitely desires good cards. And, you know, so he's very, very powerful in that regard. And then, so your last critical question on a CEDH commander is, does he enable card draw? And, you know, by himself, BRAGO doesn't. But you can wring a lot of card draw out of the Teferi's tutelage. Enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. Off of, oh boy, you've got, we talked about, I'm completely drawing a blank, the Cloudblazer Fairy, I think that was the name. You know, that's one of the card draw engines in here. The, yeah, Cloudblazer, right there. It's Human Scout, sorry, not a fairy. You know, that's card draw. Your Agent of Treachery is card draw. Your, you know, so BRAGO allows us to abuse the Enter the Battlefield card draw off of a variety of other things in the deck. And so he really meets at least 2, arguably 2.5 of the critical features of a CEDH commander. And, you know, like I said, he's good. He's very, very good. And that's part of why I have mixed feelings about him. Is, you know, so you don't want to walk into a pillow fight with a Glock. You know, you need to talk to your play group about, okay, well, what are we doing? What's the power level of what's going on? You know, you walk up to a new player with this BRAGO deck, and they're not, you know, they just don't get anything down on the board, and then you feel like a heel. You know, that person didn't have fun, and you felt, you know, like ashamed of what you were doing the whole time you were playing the game, and you know, don't do that to people. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to people. But, you know, BRAGO done right, you know, some people like to play against stax. You know, I enjoy playing my Lathril deck or my Krenko deck against my BRAGO deck because it's a race. Both Lathril and Krenko are very, very fast. And there's a legitimate question. Can you beat BRAGO to the lock? Because if you can do that, if you can establish board dominance before BRAGO locks you out of the game, then you got it. But if you're not faster than BRAGO, yeah, then there's not much hope. So I'm Mr. Magic. That's been my Brago deck tech. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And again, I really would love to hear from you in the comments. How do you play Brago?